Hello, I'm Ed Reed, the editor of E-FWD. I'm delighted to be joined by Stephen Flynn. Stephen, how did you find the event? Was it interesting? Was it enlightening?
You know what? I thought it was properly engaging, which is in politics can often not be the case if I'm being candid. But no, it was really good to have a variety of different voices. The fact that we had the breakouts were really good as well, the workshops, and you know, to hear directly from people in industry from all aspects of it about where their challenges are, but also where they see opportunities was really enlightening. And I think for those of us who are policymakers or lawmakers to be able to engage in that format without necessarily being at the front of the room, but to just be able to listen to people speaking candidly and to then reflect on that was really good. And I think it's a positive thing. And you know, hopefully going forward, more people can engage in this sort of way, because I think perhaps in Scotland we don't necessarily do enough of this, and that can be resolved through this format.
I mean, I think one of the things that kind of came up, and that seems to come up a lot in these kind of discussions, is the sort of distance between the energy industry and people, right? And I think I kind of often feel like politicians are kind of in the middle. You kind of got to fit in both camps and sort of trying to, you know, kind of bring people together. How should the energy industry be, you know, talking to politicians, talking to people? What is a better way of doing it?
Yeah, I'd probably just say it's not really detached from my life, because in Aberdeen that is something which is always at the forefront of your mind, obviously. But look, I think when we distill it down to basics, if someone will be watching this at this moment in time, they're doing so because they've charged it. That electricity came from somewhere. We don't talk enough about where that electricity has came from. Now in Scotland, we know that about 78% of that electricity is coming from renewables, but 22% of it's not. And elsewhere in the UK, particularly in the south of the UK, most of that will be coming from burning gas or the like. And in the modern world, that's not acceptable. You shouldn't be burning a fossil fuel in order to charge your phone or to get something cool out of your fridge. We can and we must do better, but we need to go beyond that as well. We should be talking about the basics and how energy interacts with everyday life, but it shouldn't just be on the basis of electricity. We need to start talking about transport, we need to start talking about heating, and we need to do it in a way which takes public with us, because people know that things are going to change. They know that oil and gas isn't going to be here forever, just as people used to heat their homes with coal. Things change. But in order to change, you need to take the public with you, you need to have a clear and coherent message. And ultimately, they need to know that what they're doing is a good thing, not just for the planet, but it's going to save them some cash along the way as well. Those are difficult journeys. There's a difficult journey to go on. It's difficult conversations to have, but we need to be willing to do it, because if we're not, the problems will become greater in 20 years than they are now.
I mean, it feels like, obviously, you know, energy is one of those kind of areas that obviously is driven by Westminster, but obviously planning is more sort of Scottish. And it feels like, you know, there are these kind of two slightly different ways of looking at the same problem. And it feels like this is kind of like a challenge in itself. When you're sort of speaking to companies, how can you try and sort of, you know, assuage some of their concerns about those risks and those challenges, about sort of trying to satisfy essentially two different governments?
Yeah, and I think that's a relatively fair observation. Like the Scottish Government's just announced its Green Industrial Strategy, and a key tenet of that is going to be the planning board that's going to be created, as I understand it, to try and streamline the consenting process and to make sure that we can get projects online as quick as possible. But ultimately, energy is a reserved matter. It's for the UK government to determine the fiscal regime when we're talking about the national grid, which is one of the biggest challenges facing any project that's seeking to come online. That's the responsibility of the UK government. So ultimately, we're going to have discussion and collaboration between not just government to government, but government to government and business as well, to make sure the projects that we want to come on stream do come on stream. And when we're doing that, we need to do it at speed, at scale, and we need to be accepting of the fact that it's not going to be easy, but it is necessary in order to create the jobs and the opportunities and ultimately the economic growth that allows us all to prosper. As someone in Aberdeen, something that is very, very important to me, because we need to ensure that we have a future for the people who are working in an industry now, which perhaps won't be there, or definitely won't be there in the same scale or the same way as it is now in 50 years' time. And we need to do better.
I mean, it's good that you can bring up that kind of supply chain aspect, because obviously that is kind of, crucially at the heart of essentially the, sort of the economic benefits of decarbonisation, isn't it? It's essentially saying there are jobs that can be provided. But it feels like in offshore wind, like some of those early projects that we've seen, haven't worked out, right? Importing equipment from elsewhere. How should we do that better?
Well, the key thing in that regard is to make sure that there's a viable number of projects that are coming on stream, which industry can quite clearly and coherently say that's going to allow us to develop a supply chain, and for those projects to create a framework that allows them to connect to the grid, to offer a financial return to investors. Investors who are looking at industry, desperate to invest, but can look at other industries right now and say we're going to make a little bit more money on that, whether that's a pension fund or whether that's private capital. And government can resolve some of those problems. You're still going to have huge elements of risk. There's still going to be a requirement for innovation, but if government can work with industry proactively to de-risk certain aspects of projects to allow delivery on time and at scale, that creates your supply chain, that creates your jobs, and ultimately that allows you to then do a bit of the manufacturing, which we used to do a hell of a lot of. We don't do very much of it now. And I think that's an exciting thing. Like, yes, we can export our skills and our knowledge, and we can export how to service projects in the way that we've done with the oil and gas sector. We can do that, and we can also build certain component parts. Now, we might not be building the big, massive turbines, but the bits that sit within them, the anchors, the weights, so on and so forth, we can take control of that. But it only happens if we get on, we deliver, and we allow the supply chain to develop.
And thinking about the I suppose that sort of the other parts of this sort of the transition, obviously, kind of Grangemouth kind of comes up a lot, and it's kind of emblematic, isn't it, of the kind of the supply chain and the sort of the jobs that are at risk from this transition. How do you? I mean, obviously, there's kind of an impact on communities, isn't it? And it's you can see that sort of playing out, and you can understand why there's sort of opposition to things like the transition or decarbonisation. And it's kind of easy in a way to say, let's stop the bus. Let's just carry on doing oil and gas. Let's not do these big moves. How can you push back against that?
So Grange, it's interesting you've picked up on Grangemouth there, because I think all of our minds have at some point over the last couple of weeks wandered to Grangemouth, both in terms of the fact that you're talking about one of the biggest industrial sites in Scotland no longer doing what it was designed to do, the fact that it's going to have a massive impact upon jobs, the local communities and the people who surround it, and the devastating impact it's going to have for a lot of people. And that is how you do the transition wrong. And it needs to be a wake-up call to people that society is changing, energy requirements are changing, demand and where demand is coming from is changing, and government's been too slow. It's been too slow to recognise that that's happening, and now we've got into a situation where a huge asset in Scotland is going and there's nothing there to replace it. That's a legacy that nobody should be proud of, particularly given the fact that £450 billion worth of oil has flowed from Scotland down to the UK Treasury. But what that also does concurrently is say to people, this is how you do it wrong, so how do we do it right? And you need to take communities with you, you need to take people with you, you need to develop the framework that allows for investment to happen. And you need to do it now. We're in a global race. We're in a race against the States, the European Union, the world's single largest trading market that we decided to walk away from, India, Japan, and so on and so forth. And when you're in a race, you've got to be competing. And at the moment, we're not competing. We've got slogans, GB Energy, nobody quite knows what it's going to do. We need delivery. We need projects to come on stream. Both governments have a role to play within that, but ultimately the big levers of power sit at Westminster. We need to see a focus. We need to see a focus on delivery. We need to see it now.
Hypothetically, if you had a pot of about £8 billion, what would you spend it on?
Well, I certainly wouldn't do what the Labour Party are seeking to do, which is to use that money over the course of 5 years rather than in year, which would be much more valuable to projects coming on stream. So we're actually probably only talking about £1.6 billion per year, which, I was a local authority councillor once, that's not that far off what Aberdeen City Council's capital budget would have been. So we're not talking a huge amount of money here. Notwithstanding my slight negativity there, I think firstly they need to be clear about what the policy direction is, what it is that they want GB Energy to do. Nobody knows what they want it to do. We know where we want it to be, which is Aberdeen, what is it going to do? And in that context, they need to allow industry to help shape that, and not tell industry what's going to happen, but say, how can we best support you? And if that's taking strategic investments in ports and other key infrastructure, if that's saying that the likes of the Floating Offshore Wind Innovation Centre can be replicated, and some of the success stories that come from that can be funded to offer a bit of stability, maybe that's the way we should be looking at GB Energy. But as part of that, and I think this is probably part of the government's intention, is to make sure that the state benefits, gets a wee stake out of doing so. That we're going to give you this, so give us a little bit back over the course of time. That should help government, that should help people in their everyday lives. That's a big opportunity, but ultimately don't recreate the wheel and don't try to do something that industry itself can already do better.
Stephen Flynn, thank you very much.